I just found over time, I ended up having more and more influence. And I think it was because I wasn't focused on influence, per se. I was focused on what are the things in front of me? What are the problems to be solved? And how am I helping the people around me?
Welcome to another episode of Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop, co-founder of Social Driver. Let's face it, Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably in the world. Chief Influencer features leaders who have figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and fast-changing environment. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these incredible leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. Before we dive in, just a quick editorial note. Since recording this episode of Chief Influencer in May, Josh Resnik has stepped away from his role as CEO of FiscalNote. We hope you'll enjoy the episode. I'm thrilled to welcome today's guest to the show. We have Josh Resnik, CEO and president of FiscalNote, the AI-driven policy and global intelligence company helping organizations understand and act on political, regulatory, and policy change around the world. Now, before we dive in, here are just a few things that I think you should know about today's guest. First, Josh leads a company that's at the center of modern public affairs. FiscalNote brings together policy intelligence, global risk insights, advocacy tools, and trusted reporting from brands like CQ and Roll Call to help leaders navigate a rapidly changing political and regulatory environment. Rapidly changing might even be an understatement these days. Second, he has helped shape FiscalNote from a variety of vantage points because before becoming CEO, Josh served as president and chief operating officer. Previously held leadership roles including General Counsel and also chief content officer, giving him a pretty rare enterprise-wide perspective on the business from strategy and operations to content, customers, legal, and growth. And finally, his career sits at the intersection of law, media, technology, and business transformation. Before FiscalNote, Josh held leadership roles at AOL, Gannett, and Spree Commerce, and he helped guide digital, legal, operational, and growth strategies in industries that are being reshaped by technology. Josh, you've been called many things: a business leader, operator, lawyer, media executive, policy intelligence strategist, of course, chief executive. Well, today we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Anthony. I'm excited to be here. And those are some of the nicer things I've been called in my time. So it's nice to hear. Thank you.
You're well. Yeah, we focus on the nice ones, but
Yeah.
you have a great reputation. The company has a great reputation. And I'm really excited about this conversation because we get to sort of look at influence from a few different angles with you. One is, of course, the public policy world, the public affairs world is going through a lot of change right now. And your company is helping folks navigate that. So we have that whole thing. But then also you've had an incredible career, and influence on the inside is such an important thing we talk about on Chief Influencer. And so I want to make sure we can touch on that as well. But before we start talking about influence, I just want listeners who may not be familiar with FiscalNote, maybe they've heard the name of the company, but they don't know the full scope of what you do. How do you describe FiscalNote, folks? And why does the work of FiscalNote matter right now?
Sure. Thanks, Anthony. I'm happy to explain what we do and why it matters. We help organizations around the world manage the opportunity and risk that's associated with political and regulatory change on a global to local basis. So what that means is we have organizations of all types, thousands of them. They come from the private sector, so almost half the Fortune 100, public sector, so almost all the U.S. federal government, but also state and local as well. And then organizations like associations and NGOs. And they all have different use cases, but what it boils down to is they need help navigating the volatility and the change that's associated with all the political and regulatory change happening everywhere. So most organizations, it used to be more of a niche thing many years ago when there was a concept of who's a regulated entity, who's not. Now it's, everyone's impacted in some way, shape, or form. And it used to be that you made conscious decisions about where you're going to be a global business and in your expansion or not. Everyone's global in some way now. So, organizations of all types now are impacted by regulatory change, to a broader degree than quite often they're ready for. And whether you're ready or not, it's really hard to manage to. The pace of change is really quick. I think people see this now with tariff implementations and over the past year. But it's all types of issues, all types of organizations, and what it boils down to is these are very impactful issues, and it's very difficult to manage on your own. And so we have a platform that helps organizations do this called PolicyNote. And we have, in addition to the data that we have from more than 100 countries and on down locally, more than 16,000 school districts across the US. In addition to all that valuable data, we have proprietary insights and analysis that come from out of our teams based here in the US, based in Europe. As you mentioned, we have the CQ and Roll Call newsroom here in DC that has been covering these issues for 80 years and know this better than anybody. And so it's a very unique set of assets that we have. And I think we do a very good job of solving this problem for our customers and helping them navigate this volatility.
Well, when you talk about the global, every company's global in some way now. I think we're all reminded, go to a website and you get that cookie question that pops up because of GDPR. And even if maybe Europe isn't the target market, people from Europe might be visiting your website. So you got to make sure you follow the rules. And so that's just one easy reminder that we all see. It's such a global environment. And when you stepped into the CEO role, you brought some unique experiences with you because you'd served in other roles, as we described in your bio. What sort of drew you to this chapter? And then when you found yourself in the CEO's seat, in that role, what felt most urgent about the moment?
Sure. So, I came to FiscalNote in 2018. As you mentioned, I had a pretty broad diversity of experience before that. So I'm a lawyer by training. I had actually, as a young lawyer, just out of law school at my law firm, did a mix of regulatory work and transactional work. So I was in communications and media and helping companies with issues before the FCC, helping with mergers and acquisitions and the like. I went from there in-house to AOL to be more on the new technology side. Went in-house as a transactional attorney and eventually took on a hybrid role involving business development and legal, and had a team that did transactions that really ran the gamut across everything that was happening online at the time. So a really exciting time to be doing that. And then I was at Gannett, so big newspaper and broadcast publisher, where I ran business development and corporate development for the digital division and ran that division for a year. And then I also went to a startup where I was COO, General Counsel, and on the board actually, and helped grow that company. So a lot of different types of experience coming in. And what really drew me to FiscalNote was it sat at this intersection of different things that I had done, where it was, a smaller, earlier stage company, not quite as early as the startup I had gone to prior, but it was at a really interesting inflection point of its life cycle. It had this really interesting technology, really interesting information. And then it had just acquired CQ and Roll Call from the Economist Group at the time. And the role that I came in for was Chief Content Officer, which involved being publisher of CQ Roll Call and overseeing all of our content development at the time. And so that brought me back a little closer to the media side where I'd been, and the journalism side as well, which I had both touched on in my time at Gannett, but also have a personal connection to it. So, I have my grandfather was a journalist, my great uncle was a journalist, and I remember hearing stories growing up from my great uncle. He covered Latin America for U.S. News and World Report for many years, and I heard stories about him, filing his stories from war zones, in the middle of Latin America, and walking down the street with his hands in the air, calling out in Spanish, please don't shoot me, I'm a journalist, because he had to go file his stories. So things like that are close to my heart as well. And so it was this FiscalNote was this very interesting combination for me from a career standpoint, but also from a mission standpoint too. And I feel like what we do at FiscalNote, there's a good purpose to it because we're helping to bring a kind of a light onto all these things that are happening from a legal and regulatory perspective that really are impactful. And so we help people navigate that better. And the people who we help do it are the people who influence what happens in this world, right? And so if we can help them be more educated in what they do, then I think the world becomes a better place. And so FiscalNote to me when I joined was this interesting intersection of all these opportunities, this, of my experience, things I'd done, things that were important to me. And so it was really exciting to come in that role. And then over time at FiscalNote, my role changed. And so, it's FiscalNote has been an ever evolving company, ever changing company. My role has changed along with it. So I took on the General Counsel role for a while and helped us go public, and then became COO and CEO. But, fundamentally at the end of the day, what it always came down to for me was, still feeling strongly about the mission and the purpose behind what we do, believing that we do it better than anyone. And so that means that I believe we have the ability to solve these problems for our customers in more and more interesting ways over time, but also feeling like we have a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of wood to chop for us to get to where we want to go. And to me, that's excitement in terms of the job to be done.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as CEO, you're not just any CEO, but you're a CEO of a publicly traded company. And so there are a lot of different audiences that any CEO has to think about when it comes to influence, right? On the inside, your employees, your board, investors. On the outside, you have your customers. Also, though, you're trying to shape just the public affairs landscape, right? So you want to be part of industry conversations. How do you adapt your leadership communication depending on which audience you're trying to influence?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's, in any given day, I can be speaking to a customer, I can be speaking to, our teams internally, I can, be speaking to our board, or speaking to analysts. Today, that is we're reporting earnings this afternoon in a couple hours. I'm talking to you now, in a couple hours, I'll be talking to analysts. Just had a team meeting right before this. So you jump from audience to audience. The key really to me is there's really two pieces to it. One is being consistent in the things that you say. So I'm a big believer that communication matters. I want to communicate as much as possible to all of these audiences. You need to be consistent in what you're communicating. The core message has to stay the same, right? You can't be saying one thing to one person, entirely different thing to the other person. So it's being consistent in that. But what does change is you need to know your audience and understand the frame through which they're viewing it, right? So everyone has a different lens through which they're looking at whatever the issue is. In my case, it's they're looking at our company from a different perspective. What a customer needs from us is very different than what a shareholder or an analyst might be interested in. And so as I'm communicating with them, it's really being empathetic for the audience, being conscious of who I'm speaking to, understanding what it is that really matters to them at the end of the day, and making sure that when I'm speaking to them, it's with that in mind. So, it comes down to essentially, kind of what problem am I solving for them? So a customer, it's going to be about, what is FiscalNote doing today, or what will we do down the road that's going to be helpful to them in whatever their need is, right? Growing their business, changing their organization, reacting to a problem, whatever it might be. And so making sure that I'm focusing my messaging there. That's going to be very different than when I talk to an analyst who's going to be very, numbers focused and thinking about, what is FiscalNote's ARR today? What will it be 3 months from now? And then 6, and then 9. And so it's a very different type of audience. The commonality is the things I'm doing across all that are consistent. It's just the lens through which that audience views it is different. So make sure I adjust depending on who I'm speaking to.
Yeah, that makes total sense, right? If you're consistent, first of all, it makes it easier. You're not having to say different things, to different people, staying kind of true to yourself and be genuine, but then, what matters to them, focusing on the audience. But at the same time, one of the things I wonder about is that there are sometimes overlaps with those audiences that you can't control. So, for example, you're going to be on an earnings call with analysts, but that information, that could be tweeted out or picked up by others. And so, your team can hear it. So it's not only going to be limited to them. And then also I wonder on the inside, do you have folks that say, well, wait a minute, part of your business is getting the news out there about what's happening on the Hill. But part of your business, people can use your tools to try to get their grassroots advocates to shape what is happening on the Hill. And how do you keep those things separate or firewalled, that's kind of another type where that influence can overlap. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of those.
Yeah, so those are a couple those are really good points. A couple of big things each in themselves, and we do think about that a lot. So, for example, today, like I said, is an earnings day for us, which means that we have prepared messaging for investors and analysts that we'll speak to when we talk about our results for the past quarter and how we view the rest of the year. But we're also very conscious about, who are the different audiences who will end up consuming that information. And that does include, internal team members, for example. So, like I said, the core of the information has to be the same, right? You're not telling one person one thing and then doing a different thing, or telling two audiences two different things, but the lenses that they look through it are very different. And both in terms of what they look for, the way they consume it, level of understanding of it. When I talk about adjusted EBITDA, that means a lot to our analysts. That doesn't mean as much to most of the people who work at the company. And so that's actually been something that we've evolved over time in terms of even how we speak to the company about these things. We've been very good, I think, about being consistent in when we communicate and doing our best to try to communicate as much as possible with team members, because I do think that's very important. But over time, we've also really simplified how we've spoken about things like our earnings results and the financials to the team members, because we started from a perspective of we want to be transparent, we want to be open, and we realized that being transparent is good, but not always helpful, because again, like talking about adjusted EBITDA and the like isn't really impactful for a team member. Talking about, how we operate and why we're making choices that we do, that's what is impactful. And so we've tried to shift our messaging that way, depending on who the audience is, so that the right people have the right context into what's going on. And then as for your other questions, our business does span, a pretty wide spectrum in terms of the information we provide and the tools that we give people to act on it. So you're right. It's sort of like a really interesting way to look at it, which is, on the one hand, we're reporting on things that are happening, say, on Capitol Hill and what's likely to happen and so on. And at the same time, we have tools we make available so that organizations can try to influence what's happening on the Hill. And that could be our grassroots advocacy tool, Voter Voice. It could be advertising that we provide in CQ roll call and the like, so that you can get your message in front of Congress and so on. What I will say is we do keep a very bright line in between the coverage that we have of what's happening on the one hand and the tools we make available on the other. So our newsroom here in DC, reports in a very deep way in terms of what's happening on Capitol Hill. They're known for being, objective, nonpartisan. They don't have an agenda in what they publish. Their goal is to bring as much transparency as possible to what's happening on Capitol Hill, to help provide guidance on what might happen next based on the things they see, the things they hear, and the expertise they brought to the table. They do that irrespective of what impact that might have on our advertising business, our grassroots advocacy business, and the like. And so I think that, with that established as pretty clear principle, the rest of it gets pretty easy. There's no other connection between the two. Like, there's a pretty good separation. And then we don't get involved in questions about, what our clients may do with the information they provide. We have clients on both sides of most issues. We're very down the middle, and our goal is to educate people, make them better informed, and give them the tools they need so that they can take the action they want. We don't get involved in what that action might be.
Yeah, you're not influenced. You're not focused on influencing the outcome. You're giving them the tools so that they can, exert their own influence.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep.
When we think about sort of Washington influence public affairs, I was thinking about what one of our other guests on Chief Influencer said. Neka Chiazor is the president of the Public Affairs Council. And she said that she really wants to see CEOs look at Washington, not just as a cost center, but as a place where they can create value. How do you think about that challenge, considering the fact that, again, you have so many tools that span the gamut on that? Is that a shift that you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I think Nick is exactly right with that. I think that the opportunity is there. I think we see, kind of forward-thinking organizations do think that way. They see the opportunity in this, and whether it's opportunity or risk, right? They see that the changes that are happening in Washington and elsewhere do have a real impact on their business at the end of the day. And, government affairs really should not just be, a back office function that's kind of really not thought of in the same way as other strategic aspects of the business. If there's going to be, a tariff implemented, think of the seismic impacts that can have on a business. But tariffs are a very just easy, tangible example to throw out there, but any type of regulation that's coming out there or procurement decisions that could create upside for the organizations. If you are thinking strategically about this, you're thinking about how these issues can impact your top and bottom line for your business. And you're also thinking more deeply about the speed with which you're acting on these things. So it's not just knowing about it, but when do you know about it? So if you know about an issue early, then it's much easier for you to go influence and shape the outcome of that.
Yeah.
If you know about it late, it gets a lot harder because, opinions within government get formed, right? And people start to have a point of view on it. And you end up being one of many people who are trying to influence it rather than one of few upfront. So there's even nuances to that, which is how proactive are you being in your approach and how much do you think about this? How much are you looking around the corner at these issues rather than reacting to what's coming up? And so I think forward-thinking organizations and strategic C-suite members and government affairs leaders and the like do think about it in that way and are able to then drive change within the organization as a result. I think one challenge that there's been in the past is that kind of thing can be hard to measure. And so I came up as a lawyer, right? And as in both at a law firm, an in-house lawyer, and so much of your time is focused on kind of risk mitigation, sometimes those things are hard to pin down and be able to show a CEO in terms of the result as compared with signing a new partnership or new, exceeding sales targets and the like, which are much easier to digest and understand. And by the way, again, just being about earnings translate very well to an earnings call, right? Um, so I think part of the challenge in the past has been the difficulty in quantifying the impact that you have in doing that and really being able to tangibly show the impact that your actions have on the business at the end of the day. I think with technology, that is starting to change. I think the opportunity is there for more and more organizations to think along those lines.
Are you seeing any best practices, bright spots, things that leading organizations are doing when it comes to one, shifting investments around influence, but two, measuring that influence so that others listening in who might be thinking about their own approach to influence, might be able to, because you have just such a wide vantage point with all the organizations that your company works with.
Yeah. I think, so on the qualitative side, like I said, I think I do see people in public affairs, government affairs who are very good at articulating what they do and why they do it in a way that speaks throughout the organization. So being able to point out, being able to speak to these issues in ways that are impactful for the business. So not speaking to the issues in a vacuum, but talking about them in the business context to be able to talk about them in the context of, this line of business was facing this issue. This issue was going to impact, X million dollars of revenue or create Y million dollars of risk in this way. And here's how we got in there early and shaped it so that, it landed in this way. So they're very good their understanding of how those issues work is sophisticated. Their understanding of their own organization. So they're very good at integrating back within their organization so that they're well versed in what that business impact is. So they're not so much just a service provider for other business owners, within their organization, but they're kind of more integrated within and really more a business partner to the people who are running those lines of business. So from a qualitative perspective, when I those are the types of government affairs professionals, public affairs professionals who tend to be kind of on that front end and end up, I think, being more strategically positioned within their organizations for those reasons. And then where I see opportunity, so like I said, what's been hard has been to quantify. So you can use a platform like ours, and you have been able to use a platform like ours to quantify things in ways that help. So, for example, I was in a meeting a while back with someone at the Pentagon who had been using our platform. And this person said to me, he said, when the general asks us, how many trucks do we have going out of service within the next 6 months? He said, I've got that data and I can very quickly report to general on that. He said, before using FiscalNote, when the general would ask me, how is our outreach to Congress going, with, on our budget issues, et cetera, et cetera. That took me a long time to pull together, like all the meetings that were happening, what the results were, where everyone stood, et cetera. But with the platform in place, he said, now I can pull that information the same way I can about the trucks. So there's things like that that make them that, have been there and have been good to show ROI, both in terms of your effort, the speed with which you're able to report, et cetera. So those types of things are really helpful. And if you run a large team, you can use a platform like that to kind of pull together, here's all the activities and so on and so forth. But I think the next step in this is going to be where we see a lot of organizations moving is wanting to consume our data in a different way and bring it in through our API into their own platforms. And so I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for them to really take the first piece I was talking about and that strategic integration with the rest of the business and start to quantify that more and more. So if you think of it this way, our data is valuable on its own. So similar to like a GPS signal that tells you exactly where you are on Earth at any point in time, that's valuable information to have. Where the GPS data gets more and more interesting is where you tie it into other data points that are more personal to you, right? How fast am I traveling? Where am I heading to? What are the local traffic and weather conditions? And that's literally that map to get you where you need to go. By organizations consuming our data through the API, combining it with their own data sets, right? Information specific to their business, where they have locations, their operations, et cetera. Then that data has the opportunity to become more and more and more valuable for the organization. And I think that will help with that quantification piece. And really, it's the quantification and the integration with the rest of the business. And I think that's been the missing component.
Yeah, I love that because the second piece, I think really what you're talking about is bringing business rigor to the public affairs function in a way that, for a long time, it was just seen as very relationshipy, which is obviously a big part of what it is. But, you didn't see outputs the same way you saw if you're, in operations or you're in other area finance, other parts of the business. And so that rigor, but then starting that with the integration with the business. So you know what to measure, how, what to connect to. And, you've been in these seats inside of companies where people have come to you for help and you've helped them as, like being, counsel as one example. Just what have you learned from your personal experience? If we sort of broaden the aperture on this a little bit to your career about how to get that type of integration inside of an organization.
Sure. Yeah, it's been interesting throughout my career because I have had so many different roles and different types of people I've worked with and different ways in which I've worked with them. For me, it's always come down to it's a couple things. So one is building trust with people. So and in part that starts with a lot of listening. So kind of understanding um, what my counterparts are thinking about, what their needs are, what's most important to them, and then thinking about how I can best help them and solve problems for them. At the end of the day, I'm someone who, in the work context, I get very interested if I have interesting problems to solve, and I feel good if I'm helping the organization and people around me accomplish things. And so I just think back to like the earlier times in my career, especially when I first moved, in-house as an attorney, there's a lot of, working with people on the business side and really thinking of myself as kind of being there to help the business solve a problem. And in my case, I was doing transactions. And so how do I help get these partnerships done and doing it in a way where, the business counterparts I was working with, understanding kind of what are their problems, what are they trying to accomplish in the deal, and how can I help them move that deal forward at every stage. And I just found over time, um, just in the theme of influence, I just found over time I ended up having more and more influence, and I think it was because I wasn't focused on influence, per se. I was focused on what are the things in front of me, what are the problems to be solved, and how am I helping the people around me? And the more you do that, and you just do that really well, then you find your influence grows. So I found, for example, like over time, I started to get more and more calls from the business teams directly. So rather than just something kind of getting assigned from my boss or whatever, people started to come to me directly. Hey, we need help with this. We need help with that. And it was because, I would, that's where my focus was like, okay, whatever the problem was, let's figure it out and let's get it done. And so I think the more that you can focus on, kind of what is my kind of sphere of influence? What are the things that I should be impacting? And how do I work with my counterparts, my coworkers, et cetera, to solve problems within that sphere? That's how your influence ends up growing. So it's more a result of the things you do rather than, for me at least, rather than ever being kind of a goal in itself.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. And the downside of being helpful, the more people coming, is you got a line of people asking you for help, I guess. But it's a good thing. It helps you get promoted, but it's also a challenge because you got more stuff to do.
Yeah, you do. And it's funny at FiscalNote, we talk about different roles that I've had through my time at FiscalNote. FiscalNote, we always say, your kind of reward for doing a good job is we give you more jobs. So that's kind of been the result here too.
Yeah, but I guess they look at you as a true story of that, playing out over 8 years. You talked a little bit about the importance of trust, and obviously trusted information. I mean, that's a competitive advantage for leaders on the inside, on the outside. I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about AI when it comes to trusted information, because when we talk about like quantifying data, like you said earlier, well, AI can, and just any technology innovation can unlock our ability to access information and compare information, analyze it. So there's this major advantage there. But AI also makes it a lot cheaper and easier to create content. So we see a lot of AI slop out there, and it can also diminish trust. So how do you think about using AI inside the company, using AI in tools for your customers? And how do you think AI is going to influence this world of influence that you operate in inside of Washington and around the world?
Trust is the absolute right place to start with AI. So AI is incredibly powerful. I mean, anyone who's used Claude, for example, knows it's just so eye opening, right? The first time you use it, and you try to build something. It's it has historically been the case that technology far outpaces, or that what we think technology can do far outpaces what the technology can actually do. When you go and use a tool like Claude, you find it can actually do way more than you think, right? When I started building applications using Claude, I would go in and think, oh, well, I'll try this. And then Claude would immediately ask me, well, do you want me to do this and this and this on top of it? And it's very eye opening.
That's a great idea. Well, it's
Yeah,
great.
and really powerful. And it does a very good job. That being said, you can't outsource your thought process to AI. You can't, there's limits to what you can and should be outsourcing, because it doesn't replace, kind of the true human judgment. It doesn't replace your own experience. It's very good at creating things. It's very good at predicting things, right? When it's writing, it's just predicting what the next word should be. And it's very good at that. But there's a whole element to human judgment that it can't replace, and human know-how and all those things. So when you think about the world of influence and lobbying, there's, certainly a place for AI in it. And I get asked this a lot in my role, as you can imagine, by people who are in the field, right? Will AI replace what I do? And I think AI is a really powerful tool to be used in it, but it doesn't replace, your years of experience. It doesn't replace the hallway conversation that you have with someone. It doesn't replace kind of the whispers about what people are saying about what may happen next and so on. There's a lot that AI doesn't replace. And so I wouldn't underweight that human element to it. And that's a part of why we value our CQ newsroom so much, is they are the people who are in the rooms as things are getting marked up, or know who's who and so on. So there's a huge value in that. We do, though, we leverage AI a lot in our products and make them available to our customers. And we're very conscious of trust there as well. So we know that we're solving very high value problems for our customers, right? Our customers have a lot at stake with the issues that they're managing through our platform. That's not lost on us. And the fact is, we don't, want to ever lead them astray. And quality really matters, and trust really matters. And so For us, what that meant from a product development standpoint was being very, very, very careful in terms of how we thought about the deployment of AI. It means that when you use our AI, it's very different than what you might get through Claude or ChatGPT or general purpose system, because we've done a lot of work on the prompt engineering up front so that we, based on our years of experience, can say, okay, this question, should kind of go to this issue. And we're very, careful about the database of information that we run those queries against in order to deliver answers. So, whereas with a general purpose LLM, who knows exactly what information they're running against, but I know it's not what we have. What we have are the authoritative sources for the legislation and regulation that we cover. We have, and even where that's public information, by the way, that's really hard to get, really hard to make useful, et cetera. And I guarantee you that the LLMs don't have all of it. It's too hard. And then we also have our proprietary analysis from, say, CQ roll call, et cetera. So, and when we're running a query, we're only running it against that. It's the definitive information. Whereas when you run it through a general LLM, it's some of that. It's also a lot of other things. It might be, Anthony's blog talking about his view on tariffs, which might or might not be right. So we're very protective about the experience we provide to our customers. We're very protective of the trust that we have built up over years. And so we've been very careful in the implementation of our AI to make sure that we're setting it in a way that customers are likely to get accurate answers. And when they don't, we'd rather say that we don't have the information rather than try to guess the way an LLM might. So I think there's a lot of power and potential in AI, and it's changing the way everything will work. But it's not quite replacing that human element of lobbying. And it's not, you have to be really careful with how you use it. And I've been internally, I've been really encouraged to see our teams take advantage of AI to do their work better. I think it's gone from a culture where people started to use AI, but didn't want to admit they were using AI. They kind of still wanted to say, oh, this is my work, whereas now I find a lot of people are coming to me and saying, look what I built with Claude. And look how quickly I got it done. And so I think that culture shift for us has been really excellent. Again, as long as it doesn't go too far and people can't just, outsource everything, like you need to put the thought in, you need to do the analysis, yes, have Claude write this first draft of it, but then you need to decide, is it right or not, and make the changes that need to be made. So I think it's an interesting evolution that we're in the middle of for sure.
And you're thinking about, obviously you're about to do on an earnings call, you're thinking about the future value of this company and how you continue to, grow market share and make sure that you're competitive. Any thoughts on just like, we look out 5 years, 10 years, where do you see things going in public affairs? I heard you say the human element is still very important, human judgment, relationships. I also heard you say, having authoritative data that you access, right? A general LLM is pulling from so many different sources. Anthony's blog may be pulled in there. That may not be so accurate if it's on tariffs. You're absolutely right. I'm not a tariff expert. If I opined on that, it would just be my musings. But if you have authoritative sources, and obviously you've built up such a body of work through everything that you do across your products and reporting and analysis and so forth, that's an advantage. So, those are a couple of things that jumped out at me that are like, okay, that tells me sort of where things are going in the future. But what else? What else do you see when you look at the future?
I think what's really interesting about it is, so I don't see even 5 years out, 10 years out. That's an eternity
Sure.
these times. So,
Yeah.
but what I will say is, so I don't see that human element going away. I really just don't. Like I think the capabilities are there to make people much more effective in what they do. And so, one of the challenges in government affairs, public affairs, we talked about the complexity of this, right? If you used to be a much more defined world, our business operates here, not there, or we're in this industry, not that industry, so we need to worry about these issues. Now it's like there's so much going on, and it's also just like it's happening everywhere all at once, right? So it's not just in the capital in DC, but it's state capitals across the country. It's local, it's, global. So it's a really hard problem to manage if you're sitting in government affairs and public affairs. Plus tying these things together, even if you're not within an organization, if you're outside, you may be one of a few lobbyists who's supporting the organization. You're looking at one issue or one jurisdiction, but then what about the other issues in the other jurisdictions? So I think where things are going is the platforms are going to get better and better at helping you manage this volume of information, this chaos that's coming your way. And if you're still trying to do that with just people, I just don't see how you can be effective and do that. I think you need to be able to leverage technology to really manage to it well for your organization. I think you're missing out if you're not. Um, that will get better and better, and it will help you do the job more than just get the information. So, we're planning to roll out more agentic AI workflow features in our platform. We've already got some in policy note, but that will just grow and grow over time. So it's helping you not just figure out what's getting done, but it's actually then going and doing the work. I think that the data will get more sophisticated. Your ability to combine that data with your own data sets in better and more interesting ways, I think that will improve as well. That's why I'm so big on what we're doing with our APIs. And I see the customers who I talk to are laser locked on that because they see the opportunity in that, but it's still very early innings there. So I think your ability to kind of get all this data, manage this data, personalize this data to you, which is a huge focus for us as well, personalize it in ways that matter to your organization, and then have it act on your behalf. That is all going to transform how these teams operate. I still don't see it replacing that personal side, right? The who you know, the whispers you hear, the conversations that you have. It's not just going to be as simple as knowing an issue is there, knowing it matters to your organization, having a platform that maybe writes a message to the member of Congress who's sponsoring the bill and tailoring that message in a way that's known to be appealing for that member in that way. Like all those things are things that platforms will be able to do. But absent the human touch behind it, I still think that you're going to be missing something. And so I think that piece of it is going to be important. And plus the context layer on top of it of, yes, I know in the numbers, this thing matters, but really that thing matters. It's similar to, if you look at baseball, right? So baseball in the way that has transformed as a sport over the years. 50 years ago, there was a writer, there was a pitcher, I think Jim Bouton, who wrote a book called Ball Four that talked about it. It was kind of an insider's look at baseball at the time. And he wrote stories about how, he and his teammates would try to bring the bag of baseballs on the field to toss them around before the game. And coaches running up and saying, no, you can't use that. Those are for the game, so where, as opposed to now, can you imagine that with all the, training they have, all the, specific warmups, all the, analytics behind how baseball is played, like the game has changed so much in that time and is so much more data driven and systems driven and so on. But there's still no substituting for the player's judgment on the field. You can have the analytics that show the player where to play on the field for this pitch, this batter, this situation, et cetera. And that's all going to continue to improve. But there's still the player's judgment that's going to come into it as well. And so similar here is like, even as the platforms improve, technology improves, that's going to change the way that government affairs teams, public affairs teams work. But it's not going to mean that there's not the human element that's needed.
I think that's such a good point. We could think about how AI can enhance productivity as one element, but then how AI can enhance the human aspects, right? So you talked about judgment. And the other thing, I just want to share an anecdote with you. I think the question is like, what does AI do to authenticity? So recently I was with a Hill staffer who said, I'm getting all these letters that clearly are just written by AI. And we don't really take them, like we don't look at them as like a really serious thing. So the assumption there is like, oh, AI used in that way kind of reduces authenticity. But I had a conversation with a CEO recently, and he said, I'm going to argue that AI actually helps me with more authenticity. I said, what do you mean? He said, I used to hire a speechwriter to write all my speeches. And many of the speeches didn't really sound like me because I completely outsourced it to the speechwriter. But now I've trained this LLM with material, with things I believe, working with it back and forth, how I want to sound. And he said, I don't use a speechwriter, I use AI. And the speeches sound much more like me and I think are more authentic. And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. So we can use AI to move us, toward productivity. That's pretty simple. But then when it comes to things like judgment and when it comes to things like authenticity, there are ways we can use these tools that are lazy and pull us away from those. They're not, informed with the right experience. But there are some people who are figuring out how to use them to enhance those things, those elements.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, Anthony. Like you you need to layer your own judgment in there. You can't outsource your thinking. to the AI. You can use it to help you. You can use it to do some of that work that you want to do. But if you're not putting your own lens on it, you're not putting your own judgment on it, then you're really missing out. And that's where it does turn into AI slop.
Yeah, that's great. I love that we haven't had too many episodes where we've dove into the AI as it relates to influence. So I'm really glad we had this time to talk about that. I want to ask you about something else before we kind of get toward our close, which is just that FiscalNote recently announced an expansion into political prediction markets. And those are becoming a bigger part of how people understand and anticipate political outcomes, of course. What's the opportunity that you see there? What do you want leaders to understand about the relationship between prediction, perception, and influence?
Sure. So yeah, we see this as a huge area that's still very, very early in its development. And it's very easy to look at it and kind of look askance at it. If you're not kind of interested personally, kind of in the kind of gambling and betting aspect of it. You look at it, you can look at it as sort of a distraction or not legitimate, or there's certainly a lot of questions that have come up about who are the people participating in these markets and the like. And those are real issues. But if you kind of extract it for a moment and think about where the opportunities are and where the market may develop, this is the sort of thing that gets very exciting for us. So where we look at it is we say, we have all this really important information, unique data and expertise. And we have seen demand globally for this information because these are issues that, like I said, impact organizations and are also just of interest to people. Look at what's happening in the United States with interest across the board in what's happening from a political perspective, and not even just within your own jurisdiction. People are looking at, you can live in Maryland and still care what's happening in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, right? And these are things that just weren't the case 30 years ago, but they are now. And so there's this tremendous interest in it and this demand for this information. And when you think about it, there hasn't really been an outlet like this for people to get involved in it. And so with this done in the right way, that's a huge opportunity for people to kind of express this passion they have around it and to get involved. So certainly that's true from a consumer standpoint. It's a way to be interested, a way to express some passion around it. It's just a new kind of outlet for that demand that's already there. But also what's really interesting and where I see an opportunity is with institutions. So when you think about it, institutions of all types hedge risk all the time. Airlines do it with fuel prices in commodities market and the likes. But there isn't yet a real good market for them to do it with political risk and policy risk. And so we'll see how this shapes up over time. But I do think the opportunity is there as these markets mature. And if you get the rules right and you get, make sure that the markets are legitimate, clean, et cetera, all the things that you would expect out of financial markets, that does open the door for organizations to start to do more to quantify this political and policy risk that they face and to start to hedge some of that risk in the right market. And so that's completely untapped right now because the markets that are out there right now are really not good at fulfilling that. In part, the way the markets are managed, in part because there's still questions about who's even participating in these markets. So you have to clean that up and you have to get it to be more, kind of more akin to like the Chicago Board of Trade than to what you see now. But if you see the market kind of go that direction and go there, then, and you get enough liquidity in the market and so on, that opportunity is there. And that's potentially a really massive market. So whether you're looking at consumer interest, institutional interest, we're still in the very early innings here on this. But I think that the opportunity here is massive. And so for us as a company, again, I don't think it's oversimplifying to say it's just one more outlet for our data. And, again, our data, our expertise, because the other thing I'll add is this is much harder for organizations to manage than, say, a sports prediction market or a sports betting market. With sports, when the Super Bowl is being played, which teams are, minute by minute, what has happened, the result at the end, there's no debating any of those things. Questions often of political nature, all can depend on how the markets are created up front, how they're crafted, how they're worded. You have market resolution issues at the end. You get, you can have, more than 100,000 bills introduced across state legislatures in any given year. There's only a fraction of them that actually have a chance of moving forward. In the sports world, it's like saying, you have 100,000 plus scrimmages and then only a handful of games. And so if you're operating a market like this, you need to understand which are the real ones that are like the real games and which are not, which are more like the scrimmages, so that
Yeah.
you have a market that, so that you're operating the right market. So there's a lot of complexity to it. But again, for us, that's our second nature. So we have the data, we have the expertise, and so we see a very big opportunity here.
Well, some people hear that and they're going to be really excited because they love prediction markets. And some people are going to hear it and they're going to say, I don't like that, or I don't know anything about it. But I think what we can't dispute is that prediction markets are growing in all areas of life, and they influence outcomes.
Yeah.
And so we need to pay attention to it. So I'm excited to sort of keep tabs on what you all are doing in that regard, because obviously it's a big part of the future, whether we like it or not. It's what's coming. I want to close just with a question I like to ask all of our guests, Josh, which is, you've had a really varied career. You're doing incredible things now as CEO. When you think about influence, what's your definition of influence today, and how has that changed across your career, if at all?
So that's a good question, Anthony. So, and probably I thought about it differently earlier in my career than I do now. So, kind of how you think about these things, I think changes as you progress. And so, I think when you're, I'll just speak to myself, right? So at first in my earliest stages, I thought about persuasion, in the first deals that I did, as a young attorney, it was how do I persuade the other side to, get to my side, et cetera. And I learned over time that it was less about that type of persuasion, and really started more with what we talked about before, which is building the trust. And so, in doing that, when you listen, when you learn from people, you're much better able to build trust with them. And when you build trust and, kind of in those areas that you control, that's when the influence happens. And so I've seen that, as I progressed, so to contrast with the early days of my career, as I matured from a partnership standpoint, I spent a lot of time, far more time listening in negotiations than I did speaking, because I really found that what was most valuable was to, learn from the other side. And I found that that helped me build credibility, helped me build trust, and then that helped me get things done. And I found that come into play, many times, throughout my career, where I was then able, because I was truly genuinely listening, trying to understand their pain, we could work together to solve problems that helped. And so I'd say for someone who's kind of growing through their career, who's thinking about how do I build this influence and how do I grow, I'd say focus on, listening and learning, and building trust with people, focusing on what you can control. So, what are the right areas for you to think about where you want to impact and where you want to have influence? And then, really just, make it your mission to solve interesting problems and help other people. And if you do those things, then you'll find your influence grows. You'll find people want to work with you more. You'll find, people trust you with more and more things. They'll come to you to, ask you for help with things. And so, the influence will just be a byproduct of those behaviors, of the listening, the building trust, and really with those things as the foundation.
I love that. And I think, as I reflect on the conversation that we had today, Josh, trust came up a lot, right? Trust and influence they're hand in hand, and we really can't have influence without trust. So when we think about, well, what do we have to do to build that trust? We heard some lessons from you throughout your career, being in various roles, leveraging that background as you move forward through different steps. But just, this idea of listening, finding ways to help people, right? That human connection. And we talked a lot about, FiscalNote and the various business units that you have that do all kinds of different things, including, CQ roll call and technology tools and analysis. And it's, I think, clear that data and technology are so important today when you're navigating a fast changing landscape. How can you possibly process all that information? There just aren't enough humans to do it. And so we have to use technology so that we can keep up. But we can use technology in a way that it reinforces the judgment of humans. It allows leaders to make better judgment, but that human judgment is still a part of it. And it allows them to build relationships in a way that is authentic, that's influential, that's, connects the dots. So there's this really important technology and data piece. The platform side, I guess, is what you kind of have it. You have your products, but then there's also the people side. And what I've heard is that you're focused on enabling people to be as influential as possible in the work that they do through information, through advocacy, et cetera, which is a pretty great reflection of the kind of philosophy that you have and the career that you've had to bring you to where you are today. So, Josh, I just want to say thanks for spending time with us today to share about your own story, to share about FiscalNote, and to talk about trust and influence. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise, Anthony. Thanks so much for having me. This was a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or of your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.